All right, sailing adventures and failures, part 2. So in today's video, we're gonna go over the massive project that was fixing the sailboat and the centerboard hinge mechanism that we broke in the last video. Here's how we ended up fixing it. We decided to gut the centerboard from the boat, get rid of the entire old mechanism, the pieces of aluminum from within the slot that kind of helped the centerboard hinge up and down. And instead, we came up with a new design that was a lot simpler and hopefully in the future is going to be a lot harder to fail. So the plan was my father-in-law cut out the pieces of wood, he drew up a template, cut it out with cardboard, gave it to me, and my job was to find some wood, a hardwood, roughly an inch thick, that would do for the job of replacing the old hardwood that was there. I ended up finding on Facebook Marketplace some white oak that was rough sawn, and I have a planer, so I figured I'll use 2 to 3 feet of it and cut down and plane down and cut out the pieces that we need, these very custom shaped pieces for our project, and we'd be good to go. So I'm cutting it down, I'm planing it down, and I cut it into the shape that it needs to be. And then once I finally got the shape pretty much exactly how it needs to be shaped, I do a little round over to give it a nice edge, and I give it to my father-in-law for installation. In parallel with making the new centerboard mechanism pieces, I took the centerboard and we thought there was a crack going through the centerboard, and because we saw a split in the wood up near the top. So obviously we figured, okay, the wood is not fully sealed. Let's redo the whole centerboard and we'll refiberglass it. We'll make sure it's waterproof and we'll seal it all the way. Also, the point at which it was pivoting before, there was a hole that was made for that, and the fiberglass on the outside wasn't going through the hole. The hole was bare wood, and so that was obviously a point where water could get in and access the wood and make it so that the fiberglass would eventually, peel away. And so all of this is below the water line, and so we figured, all right, let's try and redo this in a way that makes a lot more sense. And so I had the job of stripping down the centerboard, but as I did that, it was pretty difficult to do it cleanly, and it all depended on how sticky or how much the old fiberglass glue was adhering to the wood. And on one side of the centerboard, it was way easier than on the other side, which I thought was a little bit strange. But in the end, I finally got all the fiberglass off, but it left the wood with a bunch of gouges in it. Later on, I ended up giving the centerboard to my father-in-law to fix that. But the next thing for me was I found out that the centerboard was actually 2 pieces of wood that were glued together. And it wasn't that there was a split in the wood like we originally thought, but it was actually a separation at the seam where there was glue before. And it was, again, because water was exposed to that portion of the sailboat for 40 plus years as the boat had been used. So I ended up pulling apart the 2 pieces, and I took my block planer and I planed down the edge to get rid of the old glue, and I re-glued the entire centerboard together with some Titebond 3 glue. And initially I was trying to do some research on whether I needed to buy something else. I ended up going with Titebond 3 mostly because we were going to end up refiberglassing the entire thing and getting it waterproof anyways. So after I took all the fiberglass off and then glued the centerboard together, I sanded it down and I drilled a new hole for the new pin size that we would have at the pivoting location. So we tried to keep the pivoting location exactly the same on the old design versus the new design. That way it will actually fold up into the space that it needs to go in. But now we have a hole that is smaller than the old hole that used to be there. And the nice thing about that is that when we re-fiberglass everything, the only exposed portion within the hole is going to be epoxy now and not wood. So we went through that whole process. My father-in-law fiberglassed, he painted the centerboard and got it looking very nice, very new. We ended up getting some Total Boat brand marine paint so that we could, paint everything that's gonna go back under the water, paint the centerboard, and we're gonna repaint some of the inside of the boat to make it, one, look a little nicer and newer, and two, to make it more waterproof again. So I finished fixing up the centerboard, and then I went back to the hinge mechanism that goes on the inside of the boat. And then the final thing that needed to be done for that centerboard hinge mechanism was there were these grooves that were built into the shape of the boat that kind of stuck out into where we wanted to mount this thing. And so I needed to take my router and route out a groove to allow a little bit of an air gap for that shallow groove that's in the boat. And that way it doesn't just touch on the one point, but it will touch on the majority of that back surface. Also, with there being a little bit of an air gap in there, we're gonna fill all that up with epoxy, and that gave us the opportunity to fill it with more epoxy and make it a little bit stronger and thicker. That's exactly what we ended up doing. However, there were a couple other complications that arose due to just scheduling conflicts and availability of all of us there at the same time. And so we ended up flipping the boat on its side in order to get the centerboard in and out several times in the beginning, and then we wanted it on its side again to install the centerboard near the end. However, when the boat is on its side, it made it easy to install half of the centerboard hinge mechanism on the one side, but the other half that is supposed to be installed on now the bottom side, it's hard to do that sort of thing upside down, and everything, gravity wants to make the epoxy fall down. We did all that, we got the boat back down. He installed the other side's centerboard hinge mechanism, painted everything, painted some of the bottom of the inside of the boat as well, and then added some extra fiberglass or epoxy or whatever he needed to kind of get everything sealed and secured, made sure that the centerboard fit, everything was lined up, the pin was the right length, everything was good to go. And yeah, now we can go back out on the water with it, and we can have a couple more sailing adventures until the next thing breaks. That's basically the gist of the project that was fixing up the sailboat. And it seems like a relatively simple thing, but it was kind of like one obstacle after another. And as you're trying to do one thing, you kind of mess things up at the same time with, the gouges coming out of the wood. And so there was just like one thing after another, and lots of man hours were put into fixing this boat. It doesn't look like a lot was done, but it's pretty rewarding now to finally have a boat that is functional. Now it's fixed, and now we can go sailing again. So stay tuned. Hopefully we keep it to just sailing adventures and no more failures. This is Kevin from Hidden Hill Skills. If you liked today's video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next video.